Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take information you're interested in, could be articles, research, even your own notes, and we really dig into it. We pull out the core insights so you can get informed without wading through everything.
Exactly. It's like a focus briefing tailored for you.
Think of it as your shortcut to understanding what really matters. Today, we're diving into Islamic architecture in India. We got some fantastic excerpts from a book on the topic, thanks to one of you sharing them.
And they really cover a lot of ground, don't they? From the earliest influences right through the Mughals and touching on all these different regional variations. It's quite a journey.
It really is. So our mission, our goal for this deep dive, is to map out that journey. We want to understand where this architecture came from, how it changed over time, and what makes it, distinctive.
We're aiming for those key insights, the surprising bits maybe, but keeping it manageable, not overwhelming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No dense academic lectures here. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The sources mention some really early kind of limited incursions of Islamic influence even before the Delhi Sultanate. What did those look like?
Right. So before the late 12th century, before Delhi really became the center, there were these earlier contexts. Back in the 8th century, you had the Arab presence down in the lower Indus region.
Okay.
And that's where we first see glazed tile decoration arriving, brought from places like Babylonia. And what's interesting is that craft, it actually stuck around in areas like Multan.
Huh. Persisted for centuries then.
Yeah. And then later, maybe first half of the 12th century, you had the Ghaznavids ruling Punjab from Lahore. They left behind some structures, mostly a timber and brick, mostly gone now. But the relics suggest a style influenced by Western Asia. Think projecting decorations, ornamental niches, that sort of thing.
So decorative ideas starting to filter in.
Kind of laying the groundwork, yeah. These early elements seem to have lingered and fed into later Indo-Islamic art.
Okay, so these are like the initial seeds. Then comes something the book really flags as transformative. The introduction of mortar. This sounds like a big deal.
Oh, it was huge. Revolutionary, really. The sources stress that earlier Hindu building methods relied almost entirely on, well, gravity, just the weight of the stones stacked vertically.
Right, just balancing things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then the Mohammedans arrive, and they bring mortar as a cementing agent. And this, it sounds simple, but it fundamentally changed everything about construction.
How so?
Well, mortar doesn't just deal with vertical pressure, it counteracts sideways forces too. So suddenly, buildings could be much stronger, more stable,
Okay, makes sense.
which also meant you could use materials more efficiently. And it just opened up a whole new world of design possibilities. The most obvious one, the dome.
The dome.
Yeah, completely changed the Indian skyline. Before that, you mostly had flat roofs or low-pitched ones, maybe spires. Now you get these big curved forms. Imagine the visual shift.
A totally different look. Now, here's something I found really interesting. The book notes that Islamic architecture in India often uses masonry, lots of stone, right? Which is apparently quite different from other Islamic lands where brick and plaster were more common. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a key point. It seems to be partly about timing. Islam's major architectural impact came relatively later in India compared to, say, Persia or North Africa.
Okay.
So this later arrival meant the new rulers could and did tap into the existing skills of local Indian stonemasons. These were craftsmen with long traditions of working stone.
Using the local talent pool.
Exactly. And of course, the availability of good stone in many parts of India was a huge factor. But we shouldn't totally discount the earlier traditions. The ideas from Persia and Arabia brick, rubble construction, they still provided some initial inspiration and techniques. They were just adapted.
Right, adapted to local materials and skills.
True.
Okay, so that sets the stage. Then Delhi becomes the capital, and this imperial style starts to take shape. What were the early days like?
Right. With Delhi as the new power center, you see Islamic architectural ideas being implemented more formally. A really key early example is the Quwwat-ul-Islam Masjid, the mosque.
And that one has a quite dramatic story, doesn't it?
It does. It was built largely by dismantling existing Hindu and Jain temples and reusing their materials, columns, stones, everything.
Wow.
And the book mentions this really striking detail. They inscribed Quranic verses directly onto these repurposed stones. It's quite a statement, you know?
Definitely sends a message, a powerful symbol. What about the actual building style? Was it purely imported?
Not entirely. That's what's fascinating. If you look at the facade of the Qutub al-Islam, especially the arches over the main screen,
Hmm.
the workmanship is clearly indigenous, local.
How can you tell?
Well, they aren't true arches in the Roman sense. The ones with wedge-shaped stones, voussoirs radiating out, those were common elsewhere in the Islamic world.
Okay, so what do they do instead?
They use corbelling, basically layering stones so each one juts out slightly further than the one below until they meet at the top.
I think I can picture that.
And the source points out this technique has really deep roots in India. Think about the curved shapes on old village huts, or the openings carved into the Barabar hills, even those sun windows in Buddhist chaitya halls. They all have this kind of projected, layered construction.
So local techniques adapted for a new purpose.
Precisely. And it often had this distinctive ogee or S-shaped curve. The book even speculates this persistent curve might link back to older Indo-Buddhist traditions.
Fascinating how those forms carry through.
Hmm.
Okay, and alongside the mosque, there's the Qutub Minar. Everyone knows that one.
Hmm.
What makes it so significant from this early period?
The Qutub Minar is just, well, it's an incredibly bold statement right from the start. That towering red sandstone, the way the texture changes as you go up the bands of calligraphy.
Yeah.
It's visually stunning.
It really is.
And the design is clever, too. It tapers, gets narrower towards the top. That gives it an illusion of even greater height, plus stability, a bit like a pyramid in principle.
Subtle engineering.
And then you have the details, like the brackets under the balconies and that sort of honeycomb carving. It seems like an attempt to mimic the stalactite vaulting muqarnas seen elsewhere, but maybe based on descriptions rather than actual examples?
Like trying to replicate something they'd only heard about?
Possibly. And you can also see echoes of the intricate, cusp-edged tracery from Hindu temples in some of the ornamentation. It's a really dynamic mix for its time.
A mix of influences,
Yeah.
even then. So we had the mosque, the minar, symbols of faith and power. Then the book introduces monumental tombs. The Sultan Gari is the first, around 1231.
Yes, Sultan Gari is important as the earliest known large-scale Islamic tomb in India. It's built as this walled enclosure a bit outside Delhi. It feels almost like a private shrine for the ruling family.
A place for remembrance.
Right. And that idea of royal tombs becoming sites of veneration, you see that elsewhere too. Locals apparently even call it Sultan of the Cave because the actual burial chamber, its cenotaph, is underground.
Oh,
The layout has the central courtyard, likely for ceremonies, surrounded by a sturdy stone arcade, but the outer walls, gray granite with these heavy rounded corner towers, they look almost fortress-like.
So maybe defensive too.
Could be, protecting the sacred space. But the inside feels more geared towards peaceful, private use. It's a fascinating blend.
Different functions in one structure. Okay, let's move ahead to the Khalji dynasty. The Alai Darwaza Gateway is highlighted as pivotal. Why? What changed?
The Alai Darwaza, finished around 1305, is a real leap forward. It just feels more sophisticated. You can see much more evidence of careful planning, expert supervision.
Compared to the earlier stuff.
Yeah. The earlier buildings, while impressive, sometimes have a slightly rugged feel, almost improvised in parts. But the Alai Darwaza, the way the arches are built, the dome construction, the decoration, all suggests a much more practiced, knowledgeable hand at work. It feels very assured.
And where did this new expertise come from?
Well, the source points strongly towards the Seljuk dynasty, who ruled in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, with their capital at Konya.
Okay, the Seljuks. What's the connection?
The Mongol invasions. They caused huge disruption, displacing many skilled Seljuk artisans and architects. And where did some of them end up?
Let me guess. Delhi.
Exactly. They sought refuge and patronage under the Khalji rulers in Delhi. So while the specific forms in the Alai Darwaza might not be identical to buildings in Konya, it shares a similar spirit, a similar aesthetic aim, a similar texture with what was happening architecturally in Western Asia then.
Wow, so a direct result of geopolitical shifts.
It really seems so. It shows how the movement of people, especially skilled craftspeople, can directly reshape architecture.
Absolutely. So what are the specific features in the Alai Darwaza that show this new influence? What should we look for?
Okay, several things stand out. First, the arch shape. It uses a pointed horseshoe arch, sometimes called a keel arch. It's quite distinctive and actually pretty rare in India, didn't really catch on later.
Unusual shape. What else?
Crucially, it uses true radiating voussoirs for the arches. Remember how the earlier ones were corbelled?
Right, layered stones.
These are proper wedge-shaped stones, precisely cut to press against each other, creating a structurally sound and elegant arch. Big difference.
Okay, proper arch construction.
Then there's the decoration. You start seeing inscriptions carved in white marble inset into the red sandstone. There's a decorative fringe under the arches, looks a bit like spearheads, slender little columns called nook shafts at the corners of openings, and just a very balanced, careful use of color and patterns.
Sounds much more refined.
It is. While some patterns, like borders, still have an Indian feel, the overall effect is more formal, more geometrical, maybe less organically flowing than the earlier indigenous work.
A definite shift. Okay, after the Khaljis come the Tughlaqs. What's their architectural legacy?
The Tughlaq period has its own distinct character. Ghiyas-ud-din Tughlaq's tomb, early 14th century, is really noticeable for its walls. They slope inwards, they have a batter.
Sloping walls. Why?
The thinking is it was influenced by the brick architecture of Multan and the Punjab region, or regional style feeding back into the imperial capital. And that battering effect actually stuck around for quite a while in the Delhi style.
Interesting. What about the other Tughlaqs?
His son, Muhammad Tughlaq, built a lot, including a whole new section of Delhi called Jahanpana, but his specific impact on the style is maybe less clear-cut. Firuz Tughlaq, though, he established Firuzabad Kotla Firuz Shah, a royal citadel planned with a very deliberate, symmetrical layout.
So more emphasis on planning and perhaps defense. And then we get the Sayyid and Lodi dynasties leading up to the Mughals. Any key developments there?
Yeah, this period, the 15th and early 16th centuries, is when you see the true four-centered arch, sometimes called the Tudor arch, becoming more common.
That more flattened-looking arch.
That's the one. But the book suggests there was a bit of uncertainty at first. Like the arches on the Mafki Masjid facade, they look a little awkward. The curves aren't quite smooth. It suggests the local masons were still figuring out how to execute this new form perfectly.
Still learning the ropes, so to speak. Okay, that wraps up the Delhi-centric phase. Now, the book takes us out into the provinces, where things get really diverse. Let's start in Bengal. What made its Islamic architecture unique?
Bengal style is quite distinct. A major feature is the widespread use of brick, often combined with dark basalt stone that was frequently salvaged from older Hindu temples.
Reusing materials again.
Very common there. The Adina Mosque at Pandua from 1364 is a huge early example. It had, I think, 11 arches on its main facade and these distinctive circular corner turrets, which actually echoes some earlier mosques back in Delhi, suggesting there was still some contact with the center.
Intermittent connections.
Right. Later mosques, like at Gaur the Barasona Masjid, for instance, are even grander, still using brick and stone, but with incredibly intricate decorative patterns made from molded terracotta tiles.
Terracotta.
And there's the specific motif mentioned, a palm and parasite design found in Bengal terracotta, which strangely also pops up in Ahmedabad, way over in Gujarat. How that happened, who knows?
A mystery link.
And maybe the most striking thing the book notes is a case in one Bengal mosque where a niche, clearly originally designed for a Buddha statue, was actually adapted and used as the mihrab, the prayer niche pointing to Mecca.
Wow, repurposing a sacred niche from another faith.
Yeah, it tells you a lot about the prevailing artistic and cultural conditions at the time, a real mixing and adaptation.
That really does speak volumes.
Yeah.
Okay, let's head west now to Gujarat. The book calls this style the most indigenously Indian. That sounds like a strong claim.
It is a strong claim, but there's a lot to back it up. Gujarati Islamic architecture, while built for Muslim patrons, just soaked up local Hindu and Jain traditions. Patterns, decorative motifs, even entire structural elements like pillars and brackets were adapted.
Why so much integration there?
Largely down to the local artisans. They were incredibly skilled and adaptable. The book draws a parallel with how Gothic architecture developed in England after the Norman conquest. The invaders relied heavily on the existing skills of English masons.
Okay, leveraging local mastery.
Exactly. An early example, the Jami Masjid at Cambay from 1325, might even show signs of Delhi artisans coming down to sort of reinforce the local guilds. Later on, you get stunning structures like Sheikh Ahmad Khattu's tomb complex near Ahmedabad. It blends Persian ideas, perhaps in the overall layout, with very local decorative styles. Beautiful proportions, intricate surface carving that looks almost like stencils.
Sounds gorgeous.
Yeah.
What about buildings other than mosques and tombs?
That's another key thing about Gujarat. They applied the same artistic care to secular buildings. Palaces like the complex at Sarkej with its artificial lake and colonnades, and even purely functional things like sluiceways for water management, or stepwells, the famous valves or baileys.
Oh, the stepwells.
Yeah, they turned them into these incredible subterranean galleries, really elaborate architectural works. And the Gujarati style, especially its decorative elements, spread to nearby areas like Rajputana too. And those intricate pierced stone screens jalis, they became a real signature.
Those jellies are iconic. Okay, let's move to Malwa and Mandu. What defined their style?
Malwa is interesting, kind of a blend. You see influence from Delhi, but also strong local traditions. Architecturally, they often cleverly combined arches with the traditional Indian pillar and beam system, again, frequently using materials from older temples.
Mixing structural approaches.
Yes, and their buildings often sit on high plinths, leading to these grand, stately flights of steps up to the entrance. Gives them a real sense of presence.
Creates drama.
Definitely. And color was important in Malwa. They used different colored stones, marble, but especially glazed tiles. They were famous for this beautiful turquoise blue tile work.
Ah, that vibrant blue.
The Jami Masjid at Mandu is a key monument, really defining the city's core. Husheng Shah's tomb nearby is also significant. It's faced entirely in white marble, quite grand, but maybe a bit more austere in feel.
The contrast.
And then later phases in Mandu saw lighter, more decorative buildings like the Taj Mahal, the Ship Palace, and pleasure pavilions covered in painted tiles. And interestingly, the style also appeared in Chanderi, showing influences from both Malwa and Gujarat, suggesting craftsmen moved between these centers.
It really highlights how interconnected these regions were, artistically. Okay, journeying south now to the Deccan, Gulbarga, Bidar, Golconda. How did their story differ?
The Deccan is a bit different because the rulers there seem to have made a more conscious effort to create an original style rather than heavily borrowing from existing Hindu art like in Gujarat.
A fresh start, almost.
Sort of, though the early Jami Masjid at Gulbarga from 1367 did use some recycled materials. But when the capital moved to Bidar in 1425, you see the Bidar style really develop. Strong fortresses, palaces like the Ranjan Mahal, the Painted Palace, and a series of impressive royal tombs.
What were the tombs like?
Often large single buildings, usually square, with big arched arcades on the sides, battlemented parapets, corner turrets, and increasingly large prominent domes. Some, like the Bahmani tombs at Ashtur, show clear Persian influence in their structure, clearly designed to be covered in colored tiles, even if the tiles themselves are now mostly gone.
Planned for tile work.
Yes. Then later, Golconda rises from 1512 under the Qutub Shahis. They built grand structures like the Charminar Gateway in Hyderabad, very famous, maybe a bit overly ornamented for some tastes.
Iconic, but maybe fussy.
Potentially, but then you also get masterpieces like the Ibrahim Raza complex at Bijapur. It's a tomb and a mosque facing each other in a garden enclosure, incredibly refined, meticulously planned with just exquisite craftsmanship.
This sounds like a high point.
It really is. And then perhaps the most famous Deccan monument, the Gol Gumbaz, also at Bijapur, Muhammad Adil Shah's tomb. It's just immense.
The scale is unbelievable, isn't it?
It's all about scale and proportion. It's basically a giant cube with a massive hemispherical dome on top. Very simple forms, but executed perfectly. The sheer size is breathtaking, though the corner towers sometimes get mixed reviews aesthetically.
A bit clunky, maybe. But the dome. Okay, completely different environment now. Kashmir. What's unique about its Islamic architecture?
Kashmir is fascinating because its architecture is so heavily shaped by the local climate, lots of snow, and the main building material, timber.
Wood. Right. Makes sense in a forested, mountainous region.
Exactly. It looks quite distinct, maybe closer to wooden architecture you might see in, say, Scandinavia or the Alps than elsewhere in India. Mosques and ziyarats, local shrines, typically have these unique, tall, pyramidal roofs, often covered with turf for insulation.
Pyramidal roofs, covered in grass.
Yeah. And the Jami Masjid in Srinagar is the prime example. It's huge. Originally founded around 1400, rebuilt later. It has these amazing halls filled with tall pillars, each carved from a single deodar cedar trunk.
Incredible use of timber.
Absolutely. And it has a continuous arched arcade around the courtyard. But interestingly, the main entrances and the sanctuary structure itself echo the form of those smaller pyramidal roofed ziyarats. It incorporates the local shrine form. Another example is Zayn al-Abidin's tomb, built on an island in Wooler Lake. Very distinctive style.
It really shows how geography and local tradition create unique results. Okay, now we arrive at the big one, the Mughal period. The book calls it the Indian summer of Islamic architecture. What defined this era, say, from Babur up to early Shah Jahan?
Right, the Mughals arrived bringing new energy and influences, particularly Timurid traditions from Central Asia. Babur's early reign was a bit unsettled architecturally. He seems to have been more focused on gardens and practical structures.
Setting up the empire first.
Pretty much. But then Humayun's tomb in Delhi really marks the first major Mughal monument. It sets the template in many ways. You see clear Persian influences, the high drum, the double dome, an inner and outer shell, the recessed arched portals, or iwans.
The double dome, that's significant.
Yes, creates a high ceiling inside while maintaining a grand exterior profile. And crucially, Humayun's tomb is set within a large, formal four-part garden, the Sharbagh. This garden setting becomes a hallmark of imperial Mughal tombs.
Of garden tombs.
Exactly. Then you get slightly later structures, like the tomb of Akka Khan, which feels like a smaller, more refined version, maybe by the same workshop. It shows advances in elegance, particularly the use of inlaid colored marble and delicate low-relief carving.
Refinement starting to creep in.
Definitely. Then Akbar's reign is really seen as the peak of this early Mughal style. He built massive palace fortresses at Agra and Lahore. The Lahore fort even has extensive tile panels showing, like, elephant fights and polo games.
Lively scenes.
Very. And of course, Fatwa Sikri. His ambitious new capital, built incredibly quickly, though abandoned relatively soon. It's an amazing complex with mosques, palaces like for Jodhbai, Birbal audience halls. It shows a real blending of Hindu and Islamic architectural elements, reflecting Akbar's own syncretic outlook.
A unique blend under Akbar.
Absolutely. Then, under his son Jahangir, you see a shift, a move towards increased refinement, more use of white marble, and the introduction of that incredibly intricate pietra dura inlay fitting tiny pieces of colored stone together to make patterns.
Pietra dura, that's the really detailed inlay work.
That's it. The tomb of Itmaduddaulah, Jahangir's father-in-law, is the prime example. It's exquisite, almost like a jewel box, and it really foreshadows the later Mughal magnificence. We also see more use of colorful mosaic tiles kashi work brought in from Persia, and maybe even plaster work influenced by Italian textiles, like in Asaf Khan's tomb.
Wow, influences coming from all over.
And don't forget the gardens. The Mughals perfected the formal, symmetrical garden. The Shalimar Bagh in Lahore is a classic example, with terraces, water channels, fountains, everything laid out geometrically. They were integral to the whole architectural vision.
The garden as part of the architecture. Okay, so that leads us towards the later Mughal period. The book touches on this and subsequent developments briefly. What are the highlights there?
Well, Shah Jahan, of course, represents the absolute culmination. The Taj Mahal is the ultimate expression, taking those Persian Safavid influences, the white marble, the pietra dura, the garden setting, and refining them to an incredible degree.
The pinnacle.
Arguably, yes. After him, the book suggests a decline under Aurangzeb, his wife's tomb. The Bibi Ka Maqbara is often seen as a less grand imitation of the Taj. Later, in places like Lucknow, under the Nawabs of Oud, the architecture becomes perhaps more flamboyant, sometimes a bit over the top and less structurally coherent.
More decorative, less substance.
Maybe. Then you have distinct Sikh adaptations emerging in the Punjab, like the Golden Temple in Amritsar, with its own features, lots of kiosks, gilded fluted domes, very ornate. And the regional style of Sindh is mentioned for its continued tradition of vibrant colored tile work, drawing on early Caliphate and Persian roots.
Still regional variations popping up.
Always. The sources also give a quick mention to medieval Hindu palaces. Not many early ones survive, but examples from the 16th, 17th centuries in South India show Rajput influence. Gwalior's Mandir Palace is noted for its decorative flair, even if the internal layout is less formal. And Rajput palaces generally are mentioned for those picturesque exteriors, hanging balconies, little pillared pavilions, curved eaves.
A rich tapestry right to the end.
Even things like the ghats, the steps down to the river in Benares, often built by rulers from other regions in their own local styles, contribute to this incredible architectural diversity.
It's been an absolutely amazing journey through centuries and across the entire subcontinent. So if we were to boil it down, what are the main takeaways from this deep dive?
I think the biggest thing is seeing this constant interplay, this synthesis between imported Islamic ideas from Persia, Central Asia, the Middle East, and the deeply rooted indigenous building traditions of India.
That fusion seems key.
Definitely. We saw how it started, evolved through the Delhi Sultanate's imperial style, got fresh energy from the Khaljis and later the Mughals with their Timurid background, and then how it flowered into all these unique provincial styles, Bengal, Gujarat, Malwa, the Deccan, Kashmir, each adapting ideas to local materials, skills, and tastes.
And the innovations along the way.
Right. Things like the introduction of mortar changing everything, the development and adaptation of arch forms from corbel to true voussoir arches to the four-centered arch, and the incredible variety in decoration. Intricate stone carving, colorful tile work, pietra dura, plasterwork.
It really paints a much richer picture than just, the famous postcard images. This deep dive gives a solid foundation for understanding that complexity.
It absolutely does. It shows the depth and breadth of this architectural heritage.
So a final thought perhaps for you, our listener, to take away and maybe mull over.
Yeah, maybe consider how this blending of cultures we've seen in stone and brick reflects the wider historical and social interactions that have shaped India over the centuries. That fusion in architecture mirrors a larger cultural fusion, doesn't it?
It really does. Or perhaps think about which particular element or style we discussed today really caught your eye. Was it the massive scale of the Gol Gumbaz, the intricate screens of Gujarat, the timber work of Kashmir, the perfect symmetry of a Mughal garden?
What resonates most with you? Thinking about that might tell you something interesting, and hopefully this dive inspires you to explore further the parts that sparked your curiosity.